That's a really good card right there, man. UFC 310. Belal Muhammad defending his belt against Shavkat Rakhmonov. Best fight in the welterweight division. Most exciting fight for Belal. Shavkat is a guy who's going to be going for the finish from beginning to end, and if he can beat Shavkat Rakhmonov, I don't think there's a single other fighter that's going to beat Belal before he gets too old. Here's the thing about Belal versus Shavkat. I honestly think Shavkat wins the fight, but I will never pick against Belal ever again. When I think about the skills of both fighters, unless Shavkat does not have good takedown defense, or good enough takedown defense to beat Belal's wrestling, I just don't see how he loses the fight. He's better in the stand-up at almost everything. He's better with his submissions. He's bigger than Belal, or at least longer than Belal. Belal's really wide, but Shavkat's jab, his counter uppercut, his kicks from range, knees and elbows in the clinch, which he's really good at if he defends the takedown, Belal rises to the clinch. The only thing we don't know about Shavkat is how good his takedown defense is, because fighters don't really attempt takedowns on him. Belal's going to attempt a lot of takedowns on him, so it's a complete 180 to what Shavkat's used to fighting. I'm never picking against Belal, ever again. I've been wrong with every single fight of his, and I will never pick against him again. I think he takes down Shavkat and wins through a decision, defends all the submissions, shows better striking defense than we even thought he had, walks down Shavkat to the fence and just lands a 1-2 combination, takedown, picks him up, slams him, and pretty much beats Shavkat the same way he beats Leon Edwards. The co-main event is Alexandre Pantoja versus Kai Asakura. Why is Kai getting a title shot in his debut? It's not the first time. This isn't the first time a fighter got a UFC title shot in his UFC debut. There was Joe Soto, who had a title shot against TJ Dillashaw in his UFC debut, but he was the replacement, right? He took the fight on very short notice and got absolutely destroyed by TJ. Then there was Dan Henderson. Dan Henderson fought Rampage Jackson to unify the UFC and Pride titles because they were kind of equal in value, but that technically wasn't his UFC debut. He fought in the UFC twice before, years before that. But the way that Dan Henderson crossed over to fight in the UFC and got a title shot is almost the exact same thing with Kai Asakura. So it's kind of similar with Kai Asakura because he's coming from Ryzen, the same people that ran Pride. So he's essentially like another Dan Henderson or Rampage coming to the UFC, getting his immediate title shot. But that was a long time ago, man. That was when the UFC was still building up its talent. And the flyweight division right now, even though it's not exciting with Alexandre Pantoja as the champion, it's still a very skilled weight class. And putting a guy like Kai Asakura, who's mainly a striker, he's mainly also fought strikers, put him up against one of the best grapplers in the sport, who has an iron chin, is going to be a really tough fight for Kai Asakura, man. And honestly, I would love to see Kai become the champion because he's way more exciting than any of these guys. And that's not to say they're not exciting, it's just he brings entertainment and excitement to the weight class unlike any other fighter. But if we're being honest with the skills and styles, Pantoja is one of the worst matchups for Kai Asakura in the entire flyweight division. Like, even if Kai fought Kai Kara-France, or if he fought Brandon Moreno or Brandon Royval, like, those are much better fights for him than someone like Pantoja. But Pantoja is the champ. He's the guy with the belt, so Kai Asakura has to get that knockout. Become the first fighter to ever knock out Pantoja, who's only had one knockdown in his entire career, and that was to Davison Figueiredo, the most powerful puncher in flyweight history. And that guy could even knock out Alexandre Pantoja. So here's the thing about this fight, man. I think they're rushing Kai Asakura way too quickly. I mean, he's a striker with not much grappling, and he's also only fought strikers with also not much grappling, besides Shuto Watanabe and like Ulka Sasaki, who both aren't great fighters. When you look at Archuleta, when you look at Kyoji Horiguchi and Manel Kep, who are the notable fights in his career, all these guys are mainly strikers, right? Kyoji can defensively grapple. None of them are even close to Alexandre Pantoja's style. And every grappler that he's fought doesn't compare to Pantoja at all in his grappling level. Like, I think Alexandre Pantoja takes the fight to the ground in the first round and submits him. He might eat one big shot like a flying knee, tanks the hit because he shares a chin with Max Holloway, eats the flying knee, takes Kai Asakura to the ground and submits him. That's how I see Alexandre Pantoja winning the fight. Kai just hasn't fought enough great grapplers that could wrestle him to the ground and also get his back very quickly at the level that Pantoja can over at Ryzen. Pantoja has fought high-level strikers who go for flying knees and crazy strikes like that, trying to knock him out, like Royval, Moreno, and Figueiredo. Then you also have Steve Erceg with clean boxing technique, and none of them were able to knock him out. Figgy beat Pantoja because his grappling is also high-level, whereas for Kai Asakura, he's a very good striker, probably the best striker in the flyweight division in the UFC. But it's like reminiscent to Alex Pereira, except the difference is flyweight has a lot of good grapplers, man. It's not like the middleweight and light heavyweight divisions, where most of those guys were strikers, right? If the entire flyweight division were strikers, Kai Asakura would probably become the champion. But here's the thing now. If Kai wins the fight, the flyweight division would be very exciting with him as champion. It's a risky move with putting Kai Asakura in a title shot for his debut. right? But if he wins that fight and beats one of the greatest flyweights of all time, he could be a superstar, and they're going straight to Japan with Kai Asakura versus Tatsuro Taira. That would be one of the biggest fights in flyweight history. Not for the West, but definitely for the East, right? That's where all the audience is going to come from, because Kai Asakura is also very big on social media. He has a big YouTube channel with over 1 million subscribers. He's big on Instagram. He's a very big deal over there in Japan. Every single fight for Kai Asakura will be in Japan. And same for Tatsuro Taira. Then the UFC can really build in Asia for more talent. Put some gyms over there, a lot more fighters out of that region, and the flyweight weight class maybe in the future might be entirely Eastern. Right? Entirely like Asian talent, which honestly, for business, it would be the best thing for the UFC. The West just doesn't care for most of the flyweights. They just don't. They never really did. Even back when DJ was a champ, fans didn't care about DJ, man, until he got traded over to ONE. And the average Western man is not a flyweight sized person, so it's understandable why there wasn't as much interest there. I mean, the West cares a lot more about the heavyweights than they do the flyweights, even though the heavyweights are way worse. Like, they're much worse fighters. But there's more heavyweights in the West than there are flyweights. So I think if they build the entire market of the flyweight division in Asia, the weight class would actually thrive. But man, that would be insane if Kai Asakura knocks out Alexandre Pantoja. The UFC would have another superstar, because this guy's striking is absolutely insane. Very fun fighter to watch, always goes for the knockout. But objectively, I think Alexandre Pantoja is just too good, and his style is very tough for Asakura to beat. It's going to be a very interesting fight. That's like the most interesting fight on the entire card for me. Crazy that a flyweight like Kai Asakura makes a fight like that the most exciting. There's also Ciryl Gane versus Alexandre Volkov. That fight got moved, and it's still a great heavyweight striking match, but I don't think much is going to be different from their first fight. Whereas Ciryl Gane, I think, is the best striker in heavyweight history. Volkov is one of the best strikers in heavyweight history, and we saw how the first fight went. Both fighters have gotten better, but I think Ciryl Gane, fighting for the title, usually is really good experience. I think he's going to be a lot better in that rematch. And who knows, maybe he shoots a takedown. Maybe he learns some of the grappling, preparing for someone like John Jones and Sergey Spivak. This fight might be the highest level heavyweight striking match we've ever seen in the sport. Ciryl Gane and Alexandre Volkov at their absolute best. Two of the best strikers in heavyweight history. Not the best, but like top 5, I guess. Because you do have like Tom Aspinall in there. You do have like Alistair Overeem and Francis Ngannou, right? We have 2 top 5 best strikers, but I still think Ciryl Gane is too evasive in the stand-up, really good from range, and enters on Volkov way too quickly with his combinations for Volkov to win that fight. The jab could be a big weapon for Volkov, and the counter uppercut whenever Ciryl Gane blitzes in. But Ciryl Gane switches stances so often, and he moves at different angles. I think it's going to throw off Volkov again, just like it did in the first fight, because no other fighter has fought Volkov like that. He's a plotter. He kind of just stands still and fights in a uniform style. So when he goes up against a guy who can switch stances, give different looks, move at different angles, attack with so many different weapons, it's just a nightmare of a matchup for Alexandre Volkov. And it would be interesting if Ciryl also wrestles in the fight as well. And I think the winner of that fight gets a title shot. Either Ciryl or Volkov should be fighting Tom Aspinall next, as John Jones most likely retires. Then we have Movsar Evloev versus Aljamain Sterling. It's a good grappling match, I guess. Aljamain has really good submissions. His guard game is fun to watch, but this is a high-level fight in the featherweight division, and the winner of that could get a title shot very, very soon. If Movsar wins, I don't know if Diego Lopez gets a title shot, but if Aljamain wins, you might just do that number 1 contender fight regardless, actually. Just have the winner of this fight Diego Lopez, winner gets a title shot. I think that's probably the best move. Both their striking are not great. Movsar's better with the basics, and Aljamain's very funky in the stand-up. And we've seen Movsar get put in bad positions on the ground when he fought Diego Lopez. Aljamain's a lot more dangerous on the ground than Lopez is. He's so good at tying opponents up and keeping them on the ground, even while he's in his guard or when he's on top. Extremely fast back takes, but I do think the fight will go to a decision, because I think Movsar will eventually defend every submission, but Aljamain's transitions and submission attempts will win him the fight. We're neither really have any moments in the striking, whether on the ground or on the feet. I think most of that fight is going to be on the ground, scrambling for positions and submissions. But historically, whenever we see a fighter from Sambo fight a guy from Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, the Sambo guy usually wins the fight because he has the mix of wrestling. Now, Aljamain's wrestling is decent, and he's very physically strong, even for a featherweight. I think Movsar's top control is the best thing that he has in that fight, but Aljamain's chase of a submission win, I think, is going to give him the edge when we look at impact in the scoring criteria. So I think Aljamain's going to be one of the few fighters, one of the few Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu fighters that beats a Sambo fighter for that weight class. And then we also have Nick Diaz Diaz versus Vicente Luque, which also got moved. It looked like last time maybe Nick Diaz wanted to smoke a bit over there in the Middle East, and they didn't want that. So instead just move the card, and it's a fine fight. I like both their fighting styles. They're definitely not at their best anymore. Nick Diaz is much older. Vicente Luque is taking a lot of brain damage. But have you guys seen Nick Diaz on the bag? He's looking pretty good in the gym. And honestly, if he looks anywhere in good form, I think he should probably win this fight, but that should be a really fun one. If Nick Diaz is focused and goes to war with Vicente, I think he probably wins the fight. He has better jiu-jitsu. He has better boxing technique, both offensively and defensively. He's going to be slower though, but the thing is Vicente doesn't move his head. If Nick Diaz crowds him against the cage and starts letting off those combinations, Vicente's probably going to get TKO'd. If it's not dad bod Nick Diaz, I think he wins the fight. So I'm going to go with Nick Diaz as an early prediction by a third round TKO, and it might be the biggest moment of the entire card, right? Because Nick Diaz is the biggest star of the card, which is still so crazy. And the fans will probably go crazier for him than any other fighter on the card. Tatiana Suarez versus Verna Jandiroba. Suarez is probably going to win, maybe. She's the best wrestler out of any fighter in women's MMA. The only thing is she barely fights, and that's crazy because everybody believes that she is the fighter that can test Zhang Weili. And she fights like once a year, once every other year. It's crazy. Her entire fight career has kind of like just gone by, and she hasn't lost. It should be a good fight though. I think Suarez just wrestles her way to a win. Verna's a well-rounded fighter, but she's fighting a specialist where neither fighter really has knockout power. So that's going to really neutralize Verna's entire skill set. She doesn't have the kind of power to knock out Suarez. So even though she is the better striker, I don't think she causes enough damage in the striking to win that fight. So I think Suarez's wrestling and ground and pound is going to win that fight. There's also Michael Chiesa versus Max Griffin. That's a good fight. Grappler versus striker matchup. At least that fight will look like that, even though Max Griffin can do both. He's going to want to keep the fight standing, and Chiesa's going to try to take the fight to the ground. I think Max Griffin might win the fight. I think the game plan to beat Michael Chiesa is so basic. All he has to do is just drill takedown defense and to get up to his feet. If that's his entire training camp, with of course weight cutting and getting good cardio, I think he should win the fight. He's a much better striker. Whereas Chiesa's striking hasn't really gotten that much better throughout his career. Max Griffin looks better every single time he fights. So I think it's a good win for Max Griffin and might be a top 15 fighter if he wins. Cody Durden versus Joshua Van. Bro, how many times is Joshua Van going to fight this year? It's amazing. This guy's fought like 3 times and since like June or whatever it's been. And fighting Cody Durden, who's coming off a really good win against Matt Schnell. That's the fight for Van to go up in the rankings. I think Joshua Van's going to win that fight. I think his striking is just overall better. Such a good boxer. I think he would defend the takedowns. Cody Durden's stand-up has gotten a lot better, but I think this is a fight where Van is going to show how good he actually is. Because this is the best opponent he's ever fought. He looked amazing against Shirez, and I think those same body shots are going to be big against Cody Durden, and I think Van is eventually going to win that fight by a knockout. Chase Hooper versus Clay Guida, the change of the guard. Chase Hooper should definitely win that fight. Clay Guida hasn't been the same in like 10 years. I think Chase Hooper submits him. Clay Guida might take him down, or Chase Hooper scrambles his way to the ground and probably wins by a triangle choke or something like that. So I think the length will help Chase Hooper a lot, both in the striking and on the ground for submissions. And the best for last, the greatest of all time on paper, Anthony Smith versus the real greatest, or should have been the light heavyweight champion after beating John Jones, Dominic Reyes. Dominic Reyes looked really good in his last fight. Knocking out Dustin Jacoby in the first round is a really big win for him, and Anthony Smith is just not at his best anymore. And even if he was, I think Reyes would beat him. I think Smith is just way out of his prime at this point, and I think Dominic Reyes is starting to rejuvenate, right? He's starting to regenerate from the ashes, and I think he chins Smith with a big left hand and TKOs him. It's hard to just knock Smith out with one shot, but I think Dominic Reyes is going to TKO him. Probably not going to be the greatest fight before the TKO, unless Reyes just puts on a masterclass against Smith. That would be insane. So there is UFC 310. Looks like there might be 1 or 2 more fights that they announced for the card, but it looks like it's pretty much finished with all the fights that we care about. And man, I cannot wait for that card. That card is stacked, but a lot of grapplers, right? It's like a grappler's delight of a card. So leave in comments below, what do you guys think about the card? What are your early predictions? And what do you think of Kai Asakura getting a title shot in his UFC debut?